You know, when we talk about a potential second term for Trump foreign policy is always a wild card. What's going to happen next?
Yeah,
We're diving into his approach to Iran today. And honestly, some of the research we found is pretty surprising. It's not as simple as you might think.
yeah, it's fascinating. What's striking about Trump and Iran is that it's always been this back and forth. You've got the maximum pressure, the sanctions, the tough talk,
Uh-huh.
all classic hardline tactics.
Right.
But then at the same time, you have these moments where he seems to want a different kind of relationship.
It's like he's playing both sides, right? But are those hardline tactics actually working? I mean, that's what I'm wondering.
Well, that's the paradox. The research we're looking at suggests that this aggressive approach might have actually pushed Iran further away. And maybe even more concerning is that it could be pushing them towards these alternative power structures, like BRICS. Have you heard of BRICS?
BRICS, I've heard the name. It sounds more like a brand of sneakers to me than anything else.
Okay, yeah.
So what is BRICS and why should we care?
So BRICS is really interesting. It started as an economic alliance. Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. That's where the name comes from. But it's becoming something much bigger.
Okay.
Just this year alone, we've seen Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Egypt, Ethiopia all joining.
Whoa, hold on. Saudi Arabia, the UAE, those are supposed to be our allies.
Right. And that's what makes the expansion of BRICS so significant. It tells you that countries are looking for alternatives. They're not just going to follow the U.S. lead anymore,
Wow.
especially when it comes to the U.S. dollar. They want options for trade and investment that are less influenced by us.
So are we talking about the decline of the dollar here? Is this the beginning of a major economic power shift?
I wouldn't say the dollar is disappearing overnight, but it's definitely a trend to watch.
Okay.
And it could affect everyone listening.
Really?
Yeah, think about it. If the dollar weakens, it impacts everything.
Yeah.
Prices at the store your investments.
Wow.
Imagine if oil, which has always been priced in dollars, starts being traded in yuan or rupees. That's a major shift.
Yeah, that's a big deal. So how does all of this with BRICS potentially rising, how does it affect Iran's willingness to work with the U.S.? Does this give the U.S. a weaker hand?
That's the million-dollar question, right?
I
With BRICS and these other power centers emerging, Iran has more options now. They might feel less pressure to negotiate with us, especially if they see better economic opportunities elsewhere.
Right. So we're looking at the situation where Trump's past actions might have actually helped Iran in a way. But let's say he wants to change things in a second term. Is that even possible? Can he really go from tough guy to peacemaker?
Well, that's what makes this so interesting. There's this dynamic within the GOP that people might not expect.
Yeah.
You see, historically, Republican administrations tend to stick to the deals they make.
Really?
Yeah, it's kind of the opposite of what people think. It's actually the Democrats who are seen as more willing to renegotiate.
Huh. So you're saying that Iran might actually prefer that they might see Trump as more reliable.
Exactly. They might see that commitment as a good thing, especially compared to the uncertainty of a new administration or a different party.
Okay, let's play this out. Let's say Trump does want to pursue diplomacy with Iran. What would that even look like?
Well, first things first, he needs the right people around him. We're talking experienced diplomats, people who understand Iran and are willing to negotiate in good faith.
So not the usual suspects we associate with Trump.
Exactly. This is about finding common ground, not regime change.
Uh,
And there are people on the Iranian side who are open to that, like their foreign minister Abbas Araki. He's a seasoned diplomat with a history of working on nuclear negotiations.
so there's an opening here. But let's be real. Diplomacy takes time and patience. Not exactly Trump's strong suits. Plus, there's the whole issue of sanctions, which have really hurt Iran's economy. How do you overcome that?
You're absolutely right. Sanctions relief would be a major bargaining chip. And the article we're looking at argues that it could actually appeal to Trump's deal-making side.
You mean by focusing on the economic benefits for both sides?
Exactly. Remember how Trump criticized the Obama nuclear deal for not doing enough for American businesses?
Yeah, he wasn't a fan.
This time around, a deal could be structured to directly benefit American companies and industries. It's about presenting it as a win-win. Iran gets economic relief, and the U.S. gets access to a potentially huge market.
So there's a potential economic incentive for Trump and a possible diplomatic opening with Iran. And we know Republicans tend to honor their agreements. But isn't it kind of strange that Trump might be the one campaigning on peace while his opponent Kamala Harris is taking a tougher stance?
It's definitely an interesting twist,
Yeah.
and it might actually make a less confrontational approach more likely. With Harris pushing for a harder line, it gives Trump room to position himself as the reasonable one, The candidate who can bring stability and prosperity through diplomacy.
It's like we're living in a bizarro world where Trump is the voice of reason on Iran, but could it work? Could it actually lead to a more stable Middle East?
Well, let's imagine for a second that a U.S.-Iran agreement actually happens under a second Trump term. What could that mean for the region?
I mean, that's what I'm trying to wrap my head around. Like, what would an agreement actually look like? What would that even mean?
Right.
We're talking about two countries that have been at each other's throats for decades.
Yeah, for a long time.
So paint a picture for me. What could this new reality look like?
Well, imagine sanctions being eased or lifted strategically.
Okay.
This could bring Iran back into the global oil market, which would really stabilize prices.
Wow.
And that would impact everyone listening, right?
Yeah, that's a huge deal, especially with all the energy problems we're seeing around the world. Exactly.
Yeah.
And beyond oil, think about the possibilities. Renewed diplomatic ties, economic ties,
Okay.
increased trade investment, all of that could benefit both sides, create jobs, boost economies.
Wow.
It could even lead to more cooperation in the region,
Yeah.
on things like counterterrorism, Afghanistan.
That's a very different Middle East than we're used to.
It would be a major shift.
But let's be real for a second.
Sure.
Not everyone's going to be happy about this. There are going to be people on both sides who hate this whole idea.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
This is where things could get really interesting politically.
Yeah.
You'll have people saying that any concession to Iran is weak, appeasement.
Right.
It'll be a whole debate.
So how do we make sense of all this? It seems like the world just keeps getting more and more complicated. That's why it's so important to really think critically about this stuff. Don't just believe everything you hear.
Right.
We have to look beyond the headlines, the partisan talking points. We need to understand what's really going on.
It's easy to just go along with whatever narrative we hear,
It really is.
but we need to question those narratives.
Exactly. Don't take anything at face value. Do your own research. Look at different perspectives. And think about what's really at stake.
Because at the end of the day, these decisions affect all of us.
That's right.
Yeah.
This isn't just some theoretical game.
Yeah.
It's about real people's lives,
Exactly.
their jobs, their futures, the world we're all going to live in.
This has been a fascinating deep dive. I really appreciate you taking the time to break all this down.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And thank you to everyone listening. This is why we do these deep dives, folks. To get you thinking critically about the world around you. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and most importantly, keep asking those tough questions.